The billionaire stood on the runway, surrounded by engineers, power, and money, and still his private jet wouldn't move. Millions of dollars, dozens of experts, total silence. Then he snapped. He humiliated his crew, called them useless. And that's when a barefoot, homeless black teenage girl stepped out from behind the fence and said 4 words that froze the air. "I can fix it." Laughter erupted. Security reached for her. The billionaire looked at her and said, "You?" What happened next would expose arrogance, rewrite power, and prove that dignity doesn't ask for permission. It shows up when you least expect it. The jet did not move. It sat there under a bright, ruthless blue sky, silent and heavy, like a giant that had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Heat shimmered off the runway, bending the air, making everything feel unreal. This was supposed to be a day of victory, a day of power. Instead, it felt like a public failure no one could hide from. Men in tailored suits stood around the aircraft, their confidence melting into sweat. Their shoes were polished, their watches were expensive, their voices, once sharp and sure, now cracked with frustration. Engineers crouched near the engine, hands greasy, brows tight, arguing in low, angry circles. Phones buzzed non-stop. Assistants whispered updates that meant nothing. Every sound carried panic, and then, one by one, the voices dropped away. Because nothing worked, not the tools, not the plans, not the money. At the center of it all stood the owner of the jet, a billionaire who was used to silence following his commands. He wore dark sunglasses even though the sun was high. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might break. He stared at the jet like it had betrayed him on purpose. This plane was not just transportation. It was his escape from consequences, his proof that he was untouchable, his way of flying above traffic, above rules, above people like the ones standing around him now, failing him in front of everyone. And yet the jet was dead. It refused to lift, refused to obey, reduced to useless metal despite the money poured into it. The billionaire said nothing for a long moment. His silence weighed more than shouting. Everyone felt it pressing on their backs. He finally turned to the engineers, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the heat. He asked how long. He asked why. He asked the same questions again when the answers did not satisfy him. The engineers avoided his eyes. One wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with oil. Another shook his head, slow and careful, like he was scared even that small motion might cost him his job. Then the billionaire snapped. He called them incompetent. He called them replaceable. He said the words people with power say when they feel it slipping through their fingers. His voice carried across the runway, loud and cruel. Heads bowed. No one answered back. Because no one ever did. That was when laughter broke out near the fence. It was not loud. It was not bold. Just a short, surprised sound that did not belong. Security guards turned at once, hands moving to their radios. The laughter came from the far edge of the runway where shadows from a low building barely offered shade. There stood a teenage girl, black, thin, barefoot. Her clothes were worn and faded by sun and time. Her shirt hung loose at the shoulders. Her jeans were torn at the knees. Her hair was pulled back with a piece of red string, frayed but carefully tied. She looked out of place in a world of wealth and steel, like she had wandered in by mistake. She had been watching the jet for a long time, quietly. Too quietly. She did not look impressed by the suits or the shouting. Her eyes stayed on the aircraft, tracing its shape, following lines others ignored. When the billionaire cursed again and threw his hands up in rage, she took one step forward. Just one, enough to be seen. "I can fix it." The words were calm, clear, unafraid. The air froze, every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-breath. One security guard let out a short laugh, thinking it had to be a joke. An engineer scoffed, loud and sharp, as if laughter could push her back into the shadows where she belonged. The billionaire slowly turned toward her. He lowered his sunglasses just enough for his eyes to be seen. They were cold, assessing, disbelieving. "You?" he said. One word, heavy, sharp, dismissive. It carried everything he thought about her. Her age, her skin, her clothes, her place in his world. She did not step back. She did not apologize. She did not explain herself right away. She simply looked past him, past the men, past the money, straight at the jet. Her eyes were not wide with hunger or fear. They were steady, focused, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "I just need 10 minutes, she said. No begging, no shaking voice, just a simple statement. The sun reflected off the jet's chrome body, throwing light into their faces, forcing them to squint. The runway felt suddenly smaller, tighter. Silence followed her words, thick and uncomfortable, not because they believed her, but because no one like her had ever dared speak here before. Not to him. Not like that. The billionaire stared at her longer this time. His mouth tightened. He glanced at the jet, at the engineers, at his watch. Time was money, and both were slipping away. He hated being watched, hated being delayed, hated that this girl had spoken when she was not invited to. Yet something about her calm unsettled him. She was not performing. She was not trying to impress. She simply stood there, waiting. "Where did you come from?" one of the executives muttered, more annoyed than curious. She did not answer him. A security guard stepped forward, ready to escort her away. The billionaire lifted one finger. The guard froze. That small motion was enough to stop him. Power worked like that. The billionaire took a slow breath. He did not want hope. Hope made failure hurt more. But humiliation hurt worst of all, and if this jet did not fly, he would be humiliated. 10 minutes, he repeated, tasting the words like they were poison. "And then you're gone." She nodded once. That was it. No smile, no thanks. As she walked closer to the jet, eyes followed her. Some curious, some angry, some amused. Her bare feet slapped softly against the hot concrete. She winced but kept walking. Up close, the jet looked even bigger, louder in its silence. She reached out and placed her hand against the cool metal. Her fingers moved slowly, as if greeting an old friend. She leaned in, pressing her ear near the side, ignoring the look she got for doing something so strange. "What is she doing?" an engineer whispered. The billionaire did not answer. The girl closed her eyes for a moment. The world around her faded. The shouting, the wealth, the judgment. She listened, not just with her ears, with her body, with memory, with instinct. She tapped twice near the wing, soft, then again. She frowned slightly, stepped back, looked up at the sky, bright, endless, blue, the same sky she slept under most nights. She opened her eyes and turned around. "I need a wrench," she said. Laughter rippled again, louder this time. Someone shook their head. Someone else muttered a joke under their breath. The billionaire raised an eyebrow. An engineer crossed his arms, offended that this stranger dared to speak their language. "Give it to her," the billionaire said suddenly. The engineer hesitated, then handed over the tool, his face tight with disbelief. The girl took it without ceremony. She moved with purpose now, slipping under a panel, loosening bolts, pausing, listening again. Sweat ran down her temple, catching the sunlight. Her hands were steady, not rushed, not unsure. The laughter slowly died. Conversation stopped. One engineer stepped closer, then another. They watched her work in silence, their confidence draining with every second she didn't fail. The billionaire felt something twist in his chest. Not hope, something worse. The fear of being wrong. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. The girl stepped back at last, wiping her hands on her jeans. She looked tired, but calm. "Try it now," she said. No one moved. The billionaire stared at her, at the jet, at the eyes watching him. This was his moment, to prove she was nothing, or to risk being humbled in front of everyone. His hand hovered over the decision. The silence pressed in, thick, heavy. And before anyone knew her name, before anyone understood why she was there, before anyone was ready to admit they might be wrong, the world held its breath. They laughed at her without trying to hide it. Not nervous laughter, not polite laughter. The kind that cuts, the kind meant to remind someone exactly where they stand. One executive tilted his head and smirked, eyes dragging over her bare feet, her torn clothes, her calm face. He let out a short breath and said, "Is this a joke?" Another shook his head, already bored, already sure. "She probably wants money," he said, like the answer was obvious, like her presence could only be explained by greed. The security guards shifted closer, hands resting near their belts, their bodies angled toward her, ready to erase her from the scene the moment they were told. The billionaire did not laugh. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than their words. He studied her the way powerful men study problems they do not want to deal with. Not as a person, as an inconvenience. His eyes moved slowly, taking in her posture, her stillness, her refusal to shrink. When he spoke, his voice was flat, sharp, stripped of warmth. "You fix this jet," he said. "You get a meal. Fail and you disappear. A meal. For a jet worth more than cities. For a machine that cost more than every home she had ever slept in combined. The words hung in the air, ugly and clear. Some of the men smiled. They liked this part. The reminder of who held the power. The girl didn't react the way they expected. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She nodded once, calm, dignified, as if hunger had already taught her what pride was worth, and she had decided long ago not to trade it for anger. Fine, one engineer muttered. Let her try. They let her move closer, but not freely. A security guard stayed just a step behind her. Engineers whispered to each other, eyes sharp with doubt. Someone lifted a phone, then another. Cameras came out. This wasn't about fixing a jet anymore. This was entertainment. A spectacle under the harsh midday sun. A story they could laugh about later. She ignored all of it. She placed her hand on the fuselage again, fingers sliding slowly across the metal. She leaned in, listening, really listening, like the jet was speaking a language only she understood. She tapped twice near the wing, then paused. Her face tightened, just a little. She stepped back, squinting, studying the shape, the angles, the small signs others missed. I need a wrench, she said. A laugh burst out behind her, loud, sharp. Someone muttered something about charity cases and wasted time. But the wrench was handed over anyway, thrown into her palm with no respect. She caught it easily. Minutes passed. The heat pressed down on everyone. Sweat rolled down temples. Ties were loosened. Shoes shifted on the concrete. She worked without rush, without fear. Her movements were precise, practiced, like muscle memory. Like this wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. She crouched, she reached, she listened again. The early laughter thinned, turning into silence, then confusion. One engineer stepped closer, then another. They frowned, whispered. She didn't look at them when she spoke. That relay is burned, she said, pointing with the wrench. And your fuel sensor's lying. That's impossible, one of them snapped louder than necessary, offended by the idea that she could see something he hadn't. She finally looked up at him, met his eyes. There was no anger there, just certainty. Only if you don't know where to listen, she said. Something shifted. The billionaire felt it before he understood it, a tightening in his chest, a slow loss of control. This wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, subtle, and that scared him more than failure ever had. Power was supposed to be absolute, predictable, yet here he was, watching it slip, second by second, in front of people who had never seen him lose. The girl stepped back at last, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her shoulders sagged slightly, tired now. She nodded toward the cockpit. Try it now, she said softly. No one spoke. The sun hung high, burning down on them all. The runway felt endless. The billionaire stared at the jet, then at her. His jaw tightened. Every instinct told him this was wrong, that he was about to be embarrassed. But the eyes watching him were many, and the silence was louder than any doubt. He gave a short nod. The engine button was pressed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the jet roared to life. Not a cough, not a struggle. A clean, powerful ignition that cut through the air like a promise kept. The sound rolled across the runway, deep and sure. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones slipped from hands. One engineer stumbled back, eyes wide, like he had just seen something he couldn't explain. The billionaire reached up and slowly removed his sunglasses. For the first time since this had begun, he looked at her. Not past her, not over her, at her. Who taught you? He asked. The question came out rougher than he meant it to, not demanding, almost searching. She hesitated. Just a moment. The noise of the engine filled the space between them. Then she spoke. My mother, she said. Her voice was steady but softer now. She was an aircraft mechanic. Best one I ever knew. She swallowed. She got laid off. Then she got sick. Then she was gone. A pause stretched. I lived in hangars after that, watched, learned, fixed what no one cared about. The words landed hard. Silence followed. Not applause. Something heavier. The kind that makes people look down. The kind that forces memory to the surface. The billionaire's throat tightened. A name flashed in his mind. A woman he had fired years ago to cut costs. A signature on a page he barely remembered signing. Numbers that had made sense at the time. A life he had erased with ink and never thought about again. The power had shifted. Not because she demanded it. Not because she raised her voice, but because the truth stood there in the open daylight, undeniable, uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, reached into his jacket, offered her money, more than she had ever seen, more than he thought would end the moment quickly. She shook her head. "I don't want charity," she said. The words stung. He paused, then asked, "What do you want?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at the jet, at the sky, at the people watching her differently now. "A chance," she said, "the same one everyone else gets." Something cracked in him, not just guilt, recognition, the understanding that power meant nothing if it blinded you to the people holding the world together. He nodded slowly. "Then you start today." For the first time, she smiled, and the jet kept running. The sound came suddenly, ripping through the heat like thunder that had been waiting its turn. The jet roared to life, not with hesitation, not with a cough or a stutter, but with a deep, steady power that rolled across the runway and pressed into every chest standing there. It was the sound of certainty, of something dead returning to life without apology. Conversations stopped in the middle of words. A phone slipped from someone's hand and hit the concrete with a sharp crack that no one reacted to. One of the engineers took a step back, then another, his face drained of color, eyes wide like he had just seen a ghost rise from the ground. The engine held steady, strong, confident, unquestionable. The billionaire stood frozen for a long second. The noise washed over him, rattling something deep inside his chest. Slowly, almost like he didn't trust his own hands, he reached up and removed his sunglasses. The bright daylight hit his eyes, forcing him to blink. For the first time since this whole disaster began, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't shielded by tinted glass or authority or distance. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her. She stood a few steps away from the jet, the wind from the engine tugging gently at her shirt, lifting loose strands of hair from her face. Her shoulders were still. Her breathing was calm. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just watched the machine like she was making sure it stayed honest. "Who taught you?" he asked. His voice was different now. Lower, rougher. The edge was gone. What replaced it was something closer to confusion, or fear, or maybe respect he hadn't planned on feeling. She didn't answer right away. For a moment all that existed was the sound of the engine and the open sky. The men around them waited, unsure if they were allowed to move again. The power in the space had shifted, and everyone could feel it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, heavy. Like the moment before a storm breaks or a truth lands. She swallowed once before speaking. "My mother," she said. The words were soft but clear. They didn't shake. She was an aircraft mechanic, the best one I ever knew. She paused, her eyes lowering just a little, not to the ground, but inward. She got laid off. Then she got sick. Then she was gone. Another pause, longer this time. I lived in hangars after that. Slept near engines, watched people fix what they cared about, learned on the rest. I fixed what no one wanted to touch. Silence fell hard. Not the awkward kind, not the polite kind. This was the kind of silence that takes your breath for a second because it carries weight. No one clapped. No one spoke. The engine kept running steady and alive like it was listening too. The billionaire felt his throat tighten. A name surfaced in his mind. Not clearly at first, just a shadow. Then sharper, a woman, a skilled mechanic, a line item on a cost sheet from years ago. A meeting he barely remembered. A decision made quickly, justified easily. He could see the document in his mind, his signature clean and careless at the bottom. At the time, it had felt smart, necessary, efficient. He swallowed. He had never wondered what happened to her after that. He had never needed to. People disappeared from his world all the time. Fired, replaced, forgotten. It was how business worked, or so he had told himself. Now her daughter stood in front of him, barefoot on his runway, having just fixed a problem no one else could solve. The truth stood there in the open daylight, refusing to be ignored. The power had shifted. Not because she raised her voice, not because she demanded anything, but because reality had stepped forward and taken its place. Undeniable, uncomfortable, real. The billionaire reached into his jacket almost without thinking. His fingers brushed against smooth fabric, expensive and familiar. He pulled out his wallet, opened it, then closed it again. That wasn't enough. He motioned to an assistant, who rushed forward, already knowing the look. Numbers were whispered, a figure was agreed on. A lot of money, enough to make this moment disappear, enough to remind everyone who was still in charge. He held it out to her. She looked at the money, just for a second, then she shook her head. "I don't want charity," she said. The word landed heavy. Charity. It wasn't an insult, but it wasn't a thank you either. It was a boundary. Clear, firm, unmovable. The billionaire's hand hovered in the air, unsure what to do with it. Slowly, he lowered it. The people around them shifted again, uncomfortable now for a different reason. This wasn't the ending they expected. This wasn't how stories like this usually went. He looked at her, really looked at her. The dirt on her feet. The wear in her clothes. The intelligence in her eyes. "Then what do you want?" he asked. The question was honest. She didn't rush to answer. She turned and looked at the jet once more, at the metal she had brought back to life, at the sky stretching wide and endless above it. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but something softer lived underneath it. Something earned. "A chance," she said, "the same one everyone else gets." The words echoed. A chance. Not money, not praise, not pity, just a door that wasn't slammed shut before she reached it. Just a place at the table that didn't require her to beg for scraps. Something cracked in the billionaire then. It wasn't loud. It didn't show on his face right away. But inside, something shifted. A belief he had carried for years finally gave way. The belief that success was proof of worth, that power meant clarity, that the world made sense because he had shaped it that way. He saw now how narrow that world had been. He nodded slowly, once. Then again, like he was convincing himself as much as anyone else. "Then you start today," he said. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. He had built empires with sentences like that, changed lives without ever seeing faces. This time he saw hers. For the first time since she stepped forward, she smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't loud, but it was real, the kind of smile that doesn't ask permission, the kind that carries relief and pride and something like hope all at once. Around them, the engine kept running. People began to breathe again. Engineers murmured to each other, not mocking now, but amazed. Security guards stepped back, their hands falling away from their belts. Executives avoided her eyes, unsure what to say, unsure how to stand in a moment where the rules had changed without warning. The billionaire stood there longer than he needed to. He watched her smile fade back into calm, watched her turn toward the jet again, already thinking about what came next. He realized then that this moment would follow him longer than any deal he had closed, longer than any flight he had taken. Because power, real power, had just stood in front of him barefoot and unafraid, and it had asked for nothing but a fair shot. The jet roared steadily behind them, alive and ready, but the true ignition had already happened. Not in metal or fuel, but in a man forced to face the quiet cost of his past. The sun stayed bright, the runway stretched on, and somewhere between the sound of the engine and the silence that followed, the story turned, leaving behind a question that refused to fade. How many chances had been buried under decisions made too easily? And how many were still waiting to be heard? By the time the sun began its slow drop toward the horizon, the runway no longer felt like the same place. The heat softened. The sharp edges of the day eased. What had been tense and brittle hours earlier now hummed with a quieter, unfamiliar energy. Voices were lower, movements slower. People spoke with care instead of command. Contracts were rewritten on the hoods of black cars. Clipboards changed hands. Pens scratched where pride once ruled. Jobs were offered that morning's version of reality would never have allowed. Apologies were spoken too. Some stiff and awkward, words forced out of tight mouths. Others soft, eyes lowered, meaning carried more in the pause than the sentence itself. The girl stood near the hangar doors, a temporary badge clipped to her shirt, now, still looking a little strange there, like the world hadn't fully caught up to what it had just witnessed. Engineers who had laughed earlier stood close to her, asking questions, listening, nodding. One of them laughed quietly at something she said, not mocking this time, but surprised. Respectful. She smiled in return, small and quick, like she wasn't used to being seen this way yet. A few steps away, the billionaire stood alone. He didn't step in. He didn't interrupt. He watched. For the first time in a long time, he had nothing to say that needed to be heard. His hands rested at his sides. No phone pressed to his ear. No assistant whispering updates. He watched the girl laugh with people who once doubted her, and something deep inside him shifted again. This time it wasn't shock. It was clarity. The jet lifted into the sky later that day. Its shadow slid across the runway as it rose, long and smooth, engines strong and steady. People stopped to watch it climb, heads tilted upward, eyes squinting against the glowing orange light of the setting sun. It was beautiful, powerful, everything it was designed to be. But something else rose higher than the jet ever could. Perspective. The billionaire felt it settle into him slowly, like weight that didn't crush but anchored. For years he had believed speed was everything. Faster deals, faster decisions, faster exits. He had measured success by how quickly he could move past people. Now, standing there as the sky darkened, he understood the cost of that thinking. Not in money, in lives, in lost talent, in stories he never bothered to hear. The next days moved fast but differently. A training program was approved without hesitation, not as a charity project, not as a press release, quietly, carefully. Positions were created where none had existed before. Shelters were contacted, community centers reached out to. People with skill but no access were given space to learn, to work, to prove what they already knew. Names once buried in old files were pulled back into the light. Mechanics, cleaners, assistants, people let go years ago when profit had spoken louder than potential. He rehired the forgotten, not for headlines, not for praise, but because he finally understood how arrogance had narrowed his world, how many times he had mistaken silence for absence, how many times he had stepped over strength because it didn't look the way he expected. And through it all, the girl worked. She showed up early, stayed late, asked questions when she didn't know something, spoke clearly when she did. She moved through the hangar with growing confidence, hands steady, eyes sharp. Some days were overwhelming, new rules, new systems, new expectations. But she didn't complain, she learned, she adapted, she fixed what was broken. The billionaire watched from a distance. He didn't hover, he didn't correct. He let her exist without being measured every second. It was harder than he thought. Letting go always was. But he forced himself to remember how she had stood in front of him, barefoot and calm, asking for nothing but time. One evening, as the hangar lights buzzed on and the day finally slowed, he saw her gathering her things. She moved with tired purpose, shoulders loose, face calm. The sky outside was painted in deep blues and soft golds. The runway stretched out, long and open. Disappearing into shadow. He hesitated. Then he walked toward her. "You could have walked away," he said. The words came out quieter than he expected, not as a warning, not as a test, as an observation. She looked up at him, thought for a moment, then nodded. "I almost did." He searched her face. "Why didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. She turned and looked out at the runway, the same place she had stood hours earlier, invisible to almost everyone. The place that had changed everything. The wind lifted her hair slightly. The night air was cool now, gentle. "Because fixing broken things is what I do," she said. The sentence was simple, no drama, no anger, just truth. He felt it settle into him like a final piece clicking into place. He nodded once, slowly. There was nothing more to say that wouldn't cheapen the moment. He stepped aside and watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller against the wide space of the hangar. She was smaller than his jet, smaller than his buildings, smaller than his influence, but infinitely stronger than his ego had ever been. The engines were silent now, the runway empty. The day's noise had faded into memory, but the lesson stayed, hanging in the air long after the last echo disappeared. Power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from how you treat people when no one is watching. Talent doesn't wear clean clothes. It wears opportunity when it's finally allowed to breathe. And dignity, real dignity, can't be bought, Sile. NCE, or ignored. It stands barefoot in places it doesn't belong and waits to be heard. Sometimes the person the world steps over without a second glance is the only one who knows how to fix what everyone else gave up on. Sometimes the one pushed to the edges is the only one who knows how to make it fly. And if you were willing to stop, to listen, to look again, you might just discover that the future you've been chasing has been standing quietly beside you all along, waiting for a chance to lift you both.